Welcome back in to another episode of Heating Up. I think we're to episode 16, recording this on SEC tournament week. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it's Drew and I with you tonight. If you're on the podcast, it's just Drew Norris and I. We're going mano-a-mano, little Alabama against Auburn tonight. The other guys couldn't make it, but we wanted to focus on Alabama anyway. So I didn't want to hear Cody's thoughts on all the Alabama stuff anyway. But we kind of want to do a little season wrap up, a little bit of Alabama, because I just think there's enough interesting topics. You know, it's a team, and we'll get into it more, but it's a team that some stuff went right, some stuff went wrong, and some expectations. And then I started looking back at really what the expectations were. And I think they weren't quite as high when I've really looked at them as I feel like maybe the Alabama fan base had. Once you start thinking about the national, the writers and the pundits and the talking heads. What are your quick thoughts on that, Drew? Were the Alabama fans, did they have a higher, I guess, hopes for this season, expectations than maybe the national media did?
Yeah, I think so. When people think of Alabama, they think of football and they think of how, Coach Saban, his first season wasn't very good. And the next season they go to national championship. And I think they kind of related that to basketball because that's what they knew. And, Coach Oates' first season was around 500. Second season, he goes to the Sweet 16, 16-2 wins the SEC tournament. And, that really raises expectations higher than even Coach Oates and staff, I think, really thought they should be. Like, I'm pretty sure he said something about that last year where, we've kind of exceeded expectations as far as how quick they got to that level. And as an Alabama fan, now that's what you expect. You expect, good regular seasons and then a tourney run. And I think that's where it kind of fluctuated this season. And I was kind of doing some research and looking at other teams, and because of the podcast and what this podcast is about, I kind of dove into Auburn these past couple of years. And if you remember 2 years ago, you guys went 25-6. Now, unfortunately, to COVID, there wasn't a postseason, but you had a really good season. You kind of got hot, and then you graduate 5 or 6 key guys on that team. And the next year, you go 13-14 and around that 500 mark. Well, that's very similar to how, last year and this year played for Alabama, whereas we go 26-7. Last year, make a Sweet 16 run, but we also lose 5 or 6 really key guys to that rotation last year. The leadership aspect, the size, the defensive mentality, the experience. And now we're kind of having to find ourselves this year. So really, even though the expectations were high, I think fans should also realize that 19-12 and a solid 5-6 seed in the NCAA tournament is really good on a rebound year from losing so much like we did a season ago. But like I said, it's success is a great thing, but it's also an evil thing because just changes your whole mentality of what you expect. And this year, the bumpy road and the ups and downs, it's just been a roller coaster ride. But, that's what's going to make this postseason fun. March is going to make March fun because we know we could win, go on a run and win, or we could lose early on. But, yeah, it's going to be fun.
So before we jump into anything more, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit that thumbs up for a like, please. And if you're listening to the podcast, subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening. We're going to put a few of these out during March. So hopefully our teams keep winning and we can get a bunch in during this time. I think TJ and I may do an Auburn one coming up also. So Auburn fans, go ahead and listen to this. And we're going to jump into a little SEC tournament talk at the end, but mostly this is going to be Alabama. So we're going to be focusing on that. Hey, I had to give one shout out to what we've been doing recently. First, Drew, is I was at the evaluation Saturday for the Pro 1 AAU teams out of Huntsville.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good target audience for this Alabama and Auburn basketball talk.
For
But
sure.
there are 2 kids that I want to give a shout out. And I hope a couple of years from now we look back. They are 2, I think, rising juniors. One of them is this kid at James Clemens, Simon Walker. He is really, really good. He is like electric. He is a guy that I think all these college fans are going to hear about coming up. And the other guy, and I know he's a little bit more well known, is the coach at Mount Brook's son, Ty Davis.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of him?
I've seen clips, through social media and this kind of the travel circuit, and then of course what they post and stuff like that. But yeah, I've heard high praise on him as well.
I've just been kind of re-energized on the basketball, just seeing some of that talent and just seeing sometimes it doesn't get, especially as a young guy, if the high school level, you don't see it in some varsity games, but then you get out there and watch them do some skill work and play against guys their own age and better talent. And they were incredible. So those two guards, look out. I know we got a couple guards in Alabama coming up in the senior class, Win Miller from Vestavia, that they'll be making some noise. But those two younger guys, Simon Walker, Ty Davis, keep an eye on them. Really good players. And then the kid out of Huntsville High, Caleb Harrison, that I've seen a few times in high school, and I wasn't ever super impressed, really. Watching him at evals, 6'8", 6'9", and what he can do with the basketball, I think it's coming up in Alabama. I really think there's some high level talent coming up. So keep an eye on those Pro 1 guys. I know you've been involved with them and know about those guys, but that's going to be fun to watch in the future. And then on the other high school note, on our radio station, Power 107.5, the Guntersville girls won the state championship. So I want to give them a shout out. I think first one in school history. And the Plainview boys won another state championship. I think Cole Milliken won MVP. He has a full ride to UAH, and he's turning it down. He don't want to play basketball. He's just going to go be an academic kid at Auburn. He's got like a 30-something ACT. Wow. He and his brother both had full rides to play basketball places and just didn't want to do it. So that tells you a little bit about that talent. And they've got another kid for next year, Luke Smith, I think's his name. He's going to be really good playing some college basketball somewhere. So a really good state championship run, especially in Northeast Alabama, really, really represented. A few girls teams, a few boys teams. So I just want to give that shout out before we get started. But getting into this episode, we know about Alabama's season so far, and we kind of want to talk about what we think went right and what we think went wrong and what caused this. So Drew kind of gave us the overview of what the fan base was thinking going into the season and how we're feeling now about it. And I want to stress that we're doing this before the SEC tournament starts. This is about how the regular season went. There is a chance for Alabama to go on a run. There are hundreds of teams across the country that would like to be in the spot Alabama's in right now, whether it be going into the conference tournament or solidly in the NCAA tournament. We'll talk about it in a minute, but it looks like high 5 seed, low 6 seed, something like that. Maybe a win could change it a little bit for them, but I'm stressing because I'm an Auburn fan. I saw that team make a run, and we saw the social media post a few years ago or about Nate Oates comparing it to a few years ago, Auburn. So if we seem a little negative or a little down, that's not saying what we think is going to happen. And we'll touch on that in a little bit, but that's just about the regular season. So I look back through some preseason stuff. So we'll jump into this Alabama stuff. And the preseason magazine I like to keep an eye on is Athlon. And Athlon had Alabama 20th in the country preseason. I think if you start looking around, I'll go ahead and jump into it because this will be kind of our matrix. They had them 20th. If you look at some other things, Blue Ribbon, which is a pretty high respected, had Alabama 15th. The AP poll had Alabama 14. Dickie V comes out with his rankings every year. They put on ESPN. He had Alabama 10. Andy Katz does his rankings that are pretty well respected. He had Alabama 13. Jeff Goodman 16. John Rothstein 18. And then Ken Palm, the analytics site, had Alabama at 19. So the highlight, the best one was around the 10 mark, and the low one was around the 20 mark. So a decent range there for Alabama, but that was kind of the mindset going in. Just kind of quick thoughts on that, Drew. Is that what you remember thinking about before the season? Is that higher or lower? Is that where you thought Alabama should be at that time?
Yeah, that's relatively the same. That 15 to 20 range was what I remember. Most analysts and guys, experts, kind of placing Alabama. And I thought that was pretty accurate moving in just because, we did return our 2 leading scorers, but there was a lot of question marks to be filled on this team as far as leadership and, how will this new lineup look with those seniors that graduated as well as Primo going to the draft. So it was a good starting point for this Bama team. And, they showed signs of top 10 teams, and then they showed signs of, not top 25. And that's kind of where we're at now and why I think we're not where those guys predicted us to be at.
So reading some of the excerpts from some of these preseason stuff, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to credit who wrote it, but they had a pretty good feel for it. They were talking about Alabama, and they were talking about Josh Primo's minutes mostly going to Keon Ellis, and that he needed to step up, and we'll hit on individual players a little bit in a minute, but I thought Keon did a good job this year and did take that next step forward. They talked about missing some veteran leadership, whether it be Herb Jones, whether it be Alex Reese, got a lot of talk in this article. But the thing that jumped out to me, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is they felt like the veteran group left, and Nate Oates more or less was able to bring his style of player in, whether it be the freshmen coming in, some of the transfers. We're going to talk about those guys in a minute. But what's your thought process on that? Nate Oates was able to now bring in guys that played his way. Did that, was it a misevaluation? Is maybe, what are your thoughts on that whole concept of, hey, he got to bring in his guys? Because if you mentioned like the Auburn side of things, Bruce Pearl got to bring in that class that didn't do well last year. And it was one of his first, like, hey, I can recruit at a really high level now. I've put something out there. I can go get the guys I want to get. And he quickly has changed back into some different style players that he likes that he used to have. Yeah. Do you foresee anything like that with Nate? And what are your thoughts on he was able to get his guys in, and maybe they didn't perform to the level of the group that he already had?
I think there's a little bit of that, but at the same time, I think it's more of a progress where he did get a guy like JD that he loves, that excels in the transition, the fast break, and getting up and down the court. But, Nate Oates' ideal guys, the John Petty's, the Herb Jones, the 6'6" or taller wings that can guard 1 through 4, or the step out 5 that can block shots, but can also, shoot a 3 to span, kind of what Bruner did for us last year, the transfer from Yale. And I don't see that we really filled those roles for this team. We got smaller guards out there on the perimeter that's guarding, and we have Bediako, who's a great. He's a young guy and he's catching up, but he's not blocking shots consistently, moving his feet as well consistently. The toughness is coming, and he's just not to where Oates wants him to be, which he will get there. It's just a young 7-foot guy just catching up to the game speed and physicality and all of that in a position that takes more time to do that.
I think that makes sense.
I just don't. I see where they're going with that as far as, he finally is getting his guys in that he wants. But I think next year's class and what he's kind of building will be more reflective towards that. We have a couple 6'6", 6'8" wings coming in that can score the ball, that can, has all the talent to defend. And, I guess you can say with, he got a transfer from Texas Tech, Namar Burnett, 6'6" kid that plays really hard defensively, good defensively, and can shoot the ball. That he went down with ACL tear before the season, and we kind of missed out on him, who would have helped our wing, defenders and depth, which is where I think we lack the most, because you talk about Primo, who was 6'6", they could guard and could shoot. And as they're finding out in the pros, he could also put it in the floor when he needed to. John Petty, 6'6", that was lengthy, and who Oates got to realize that, defense is the way that I get into the league. He was all offense coming in, and he kind of stayed that way through Avery. And then Oates came and made him realize that a two-sided ball, the way he plays basketball, is how he gets to the next level. And it really showed in his senior year last year. So I think the article is somewhat accurate as far as, he's working his way into that. But I don't think the ideal roster is this one yet. And, a guy like Darius Miles, who was a lowly ranked kid, didn't really get a lot of offers coming up. He's kind of the ideal profile, 6'7", 6'8" kid that's long, athletic. But, he's having that same growth that Petty had, whereas all he knew how to do was score. So now he's trying to learn how to play defense, play hard, play smart, and do it for 40 minutes. Whereas it seemed like I didn't get to watching high school ball of him early on or anything like that, but it seems like he was a scorer, and that's what he did. But yes, I think it's trending that way, but I don't think this roster set up right now is exactly how Oates plans for it to look like in the future.
So let's jump into some individual players then. Going back to that magazine I was talking about, they did a top 100 players going into the season. One thing I think that's always difficult because they put true freshmen in there, and how are you going to know? Like, I think that's tough to do. I would say a returning players list, but I don't know about that. And like the transfers in new situations, sometimes it works really well. Walker Kessler, Oscar Sheboy. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think to an extent, Noah Gurley is going to get a little bit of that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just to kind of give you an idea what the feeling was going into the season, they had Javon Quinterly as the number 27 player in the country going into the season. You know, he was an SEC tournament MVP, all tournament team, got hot there at the end. And the thought process was some of those guys are leaving. The ball's going to be in his hand even more. JQ is going to be that guy. So they had him number 27 overall, which was higher than they had Jabari Smith. They had Jabari Smith like 32, 33, something like that. They had also, they did like a top 10 shooters list, and they had JQ as the number 8 shooter. And we're going to jump into his shooting percentages in a little bit. That has been an area, if it was a little different, Alabama's win-loss record might be a little bit different. Shaq was the number 53 player in the country, and JD Davison was number 55 player in the country. You know, JD has had his ups and downs this year. I don't think you could say he's played as the 55 player in the country. Shaq probably is right there, if not a little bit better. If you go into what the actual like preseason SEC stuff was, they had, well, first of all, they had Alabama 4th in the SEC, so not far off, but right in that area. Javon Quinterly, they had first team all SEC. Shaq and JD, they had second team. If you look at the coaches preseason list, they had JQ and Shaq both first team all SEC. So there was expectations of those 3 players, really nobody else at the national level, but Shaq, JD, and JQ had those kind of expectations. Kind of where are we now? Alabama finishes 5th, you know, in a massive 4-way tie for 5th. So really, some places had Alabama as high as 2nd, but really 2nd to 4th seemed to be what it was. So a tick down for Alabama compared to their preseason love. But then you look at what they actually got voted, and I know a lot of this has to do with team record, but Shaq was the only one there at the second team all SEC. Nobody first team. JQ not on either. JD Davison and Bediako are all freshman team. And Keon Ellis made the all-defense team. So if we jump right into individual players, I want to start with Shackford because I put him on my what has gone right list. I was kind of comparing some of his numbers, and we know there was the talk of him wanting to go to the NBA. Then he was like, I don't know if he didn't like what his draft stats was. Hey, I might want to go play somewhere else. And he turns up coming back to Alabama, which we all felt like it was a big win. Well, year over year, sophomore to junior year, I've got some stats for you. Overall, he went from 14 points a game to 14.0 to 16.6. So a tick up. He played 5 minutes per game more this year than he did last year. I think it was something like 29 minutes a game to 34. So he was like a starter, you know, a guy who was getting in the game a lot into like a have to have him out there type of guy. Field goal percentage was pretty close. He was down 2% overall in field goals last year. This year, he was down 2% in 2-point field goals. He was actually up 1% in 3-point field goals. And that was with going up in how many he was taking. You know, I think he made 1.93 per game last year. And he made 3.0 threes per game this year. So a big jump there, up 3% in free throw shooting. And the other positive stat for him, he had 1.5 more rebounds this year than last year. Overall question to you, Drew, if we're going on a what went right, what went wrong, is Shaq somebody that you can say it went right this year?
I think so. Like you said, the numbers seem to increase this year. His role obviously was a lot larger this year than it was last year. And I think as a leadership aspect, he's having to learn how to become one, you know, with a team that doesn't have that guy. He's having to learn how to become one, and that's been his biggest area of improvement that he's had to do. I don't think he's there yet, but you can see when you watch this Bama team, him and Rojas, they're kind of the 2 vocal leaders out there that, you know, if there is one, those guys are them. But as far as, you know, where he stands with this team and where he'll be next year, that is a big question mark. Hit the guys. He's tried or done the NBA grade wise both years. He's also flirted with the transfer portal both years. So it kind of leads you, leads you to think that, you know, maybe next year is not looking good for him to come back. It's either, you know, try the NBA or transfer or something like that. But I really do think he enjoys Oates' play style. I just don't know if he has in him what the NBA is asking for. You would think with the response to Nate Oates from preseason and him coming back and trying to get him more in an on-ball role and all that, that is what the NBA is wanting him to be at 6'3", is the on-ball guard that can also score. And I just don't know if Shaq has that capability. He's a really talented scorer, understands the game, understands how to get to spots. But at the NBA level, you got to be able to do that consistently and knock down shots. And no doubt he can make a living playing this game. And I hope he does. I hope he comes back one more year and we get that senior year Shaq where everything just comes together, because his numbers keep rising, his percentages keep rising, and you can tell he's becoming a better basketball player. But it's going to be interesting after the season's over on where Shaq goes with this and carries it to next year, because like you said, he's looked good this year, and I think he's improved each year he stayed here. I'd love to have Shaq again next year. But hopefully he has a good postseason and that carries on and he gets good feedback, and we'll see where it goes.
Let me get your thought on this. To keep drawing parallels to that 2019 Auburn run, some guy that's about the same size as the guy Bryce Brown. And Bryce was a little different, that he was not a heralded recruit. He came in, got to play a little bit as a freshman on not a very good Auburn team, got to play more as a sophomore, got to play more as a junior. And then senior year, it was like his year. Obviously just a prolific NBA or a SEC 3-point shooter. He's got a lot of records and all that kind of stuff. Bryce got nuclear hot down the stretch for Auburn in the SEC tournament and in the NCAA tournament. There are some similarities to their game. I don't know personality-wise if they're the same. Bryce really prided himself on on-ball defense, and he was like wanting to be the head of the defense up there. And Shaq does at times, and not consistently. Do you see that kind of path, though, where he could get nuclear hot and just be an energy guy to go along with his shooting and really lift this Alabama team up down the stretch?
Yes. I mean, if you look at our big wins where Shaq's been hot, it's, I talked earlier on a podcast where John Petty was that guy for us last year. If John Petty got hot, it was like this contagious virus that just, hit everybody on our team, and we were unstoppable. I don't know of a game where John Petty got hot and it was a close game. And that is what you want in a shooter. And, Shaq kind of has that feel, the Gonzaga game where he was just playing out of his mind, hitting big shots left and right. And a couple games here in the stretch, he's kind of done the same thing. And you don't really see it. For instance, Kentucky, Keon Ellis was shooting lights out and playing really well, but it don't have that same effect on, the other guys around him. It seems like, when guys like Shaq and Petty, and then when they get hot, everyone gets hot. The floor opens up for everybody, and you start seeing easier shots at the rim. You start seeing, other guards hit big threes and stuff like that. And I think he does have that contagious feeling, but, where it kind of led off in the earlier this season, this Bama team's identity outside of Shaq hitting threes was very limited. It's like we didn't really know where to go, because after the Gonzaga game, we played Houston, and Houston got into us, and they kind of slowed Shaq down, and we saw other guys having to score the ball, and you saw what kind of dilemma it kind of put other guys in. So if we can get on a run where Shaq's, shooting really well, this Bama team can go pretty far, and you can see it kind of spread out, and the sky's really the limit. But that is the thing, like, or have we learned enough to where, what gets him going, and when we get him going, how do we play off that, and how do we continue to feed that?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair on all accounts that's there, but it hasn't really been shown enough for us to be able to count on that in any way right now. Staying on the what went right, my next name, and you just mentioned it on my list, was Keon Ellis. I think Keon is a guy that's gone right this season. Looking at his stats, kind of the same that I did going from last year to this year. Keon Ellis is plus 13 in minutes. Huge jump in minutes played for Keon Ellis. Some of his percentages are a little bit down, but his volume is so much higher than it was. I think that kind of balances that out. Free throw shooting's way up. He doesn't get to the line enough, I feel like, but he's like 89% free throw shooter right now. If Keon Ellis gets there, it is going in. It was up like 16% over last year, and it wasn't a big volume last year either. He didn't get to the line very much. And then the other stat that's up is rebounds. He's 2 rebounds a game more. So, honestly, the eye test is a little better for him than comparing stats from last year to this year. But I know we've kind of hit on it a couple times, but just kind of what are you thinking on what went right for Keon Ellis? What did he do? What were you hoping out of him? What did you get out of him this year so far?
It's kind of funny when I think of Keon and I look at this year's team, now looking back at last year's team and seeing the talent we had, in that second five with Keon and JQ and guys like that coming off our bench who we rely so heavily on this year. It just makes you think, man, if that team had one more year this year, that it'd be really something special to watch. But you kind of saw flashes of this Keon last year. Obviously, he was in a very much more limited role just because of the backlog at his position. When you have Primo, Petty, you have Herb, you have all these guys that kind of play the same role. That's why you kind of saw Keon, and he's a first year transfer. So getting up to speed and everything, you saw later in the season him kind of take that seventh man role, and in big defensive possessions like at the end of the LSU game in the SEC tournament last year, he was out there and really good on ball defender, and we saw that last year, and we saw spurts of his scoring ability. He didn't shoot the ball a ton, as you were speaking, but you saw the flashes of athleticism with finishes and his shot. But he's just one of those guys that this year we really asked, day and night for him to turn for this year's team in order to get to where we want to go. And I think he's responded really well to it. I don't remember what you said about the minute jump. What was it, plus 13 minutes?
Plus 13 minutes a game from last year to this year.
If you've never played
that could expose some stuff.
Yeah. And if you've never played a high caliber game, 13 minutes is a lot of game minutes to play.
I think I don't have it in front of me. I think he was like 15 or 16 a game last year, and he's in the 29 to 30 range this year.
Yeah. I mean, when you're playing 15, 16 minutes a game, you're fresh every time you get that spurt. Every time you go in, you're good and you're ready to go. Whereas this year, you got to learn how to play through adversity. You got to learn to play through tiredness, and I think that's a really cool thing to see that even though his stats are a little down percentage wise this year, they're still at a good percentage to where that this guy translates to each level and he's playing big minutes. He's guarding the best guy on their team. And I think that's why, it's fitting for him to be in what went right, is because he's having, probably even a better year than we kind of expected from a guy. And it's not like we can sub him out and sub another guy that's 6'6" and very good defensively, very active hands in to, give him breathers. When he comes out, it's a minute, 1 minute, 2 minutes, get a breather and then go get Shaq, or go get JQ or somebody like that. Just get you a quick breath and let's get back in there and go at it. I think that's, and you see Nate Oates preach a lot about we need to put 40 minutes together. And you see Alabama talk about that now. I think that's kind of why you hear that so often, is because your main guys, they're trying to play 30 minutes a game, and some of them may have never done that before. And when you playing 40 solid minutes in high caliber SEC Power 5 basketball, that's a lot to do if you've never done that before. And so getting that mentally, getting that physically mindset to pour that in game after game is what's so
not
tough.
Take a possession off. I think
exactly.
That's as taxing mentally as it is physically, just being that locked in for that long.
100%. Now we're in March where it's tournament play and you're playing, Bama's on a Thursday, so you got to win 4 games to win the tournament back to back to. There's no days off, and then you get into March NCAA tournament. There's a couple days in between games, but they're back to back to back. So it's really going to see where that maturity has gone with them, and if they're ready to take that next step and all of that.
So next on my list on what we're right, I put a question mark on this one because I wanted to throw this to you because, I follow recruiting. I follow it more now probably for Alabama than I did the previous year.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really sure to put this one in the what went right. I don't really know about what went wrong, but I'm gonna throw this to you. Charles Bediako. I put a question mark there because it's been a little bit of a roller coaster like a freshman year usually is. Has a game where he impacts it a lot and a game where he doesn't impact it a lot. But I did write down some of his stats. and I leaned toward what went right with him. But I'm curious just to kind of hear expectations because that'll affect it. I didn't have a lot. I knew he was a high recruit, and I knew he was a big, tall guy that could block shots. But other than that, I didn't know. So for me, he's been as good as I thought. And so I said what went right. Just a few things that stood out to me. He's averaging 18 minutes a game, 17.8 minutes per game. Shooting a pretty good percentage. No threes. He hasn't attempted a three. But, to be his size and you shooting 69%, it's good. It's not great. It could be better because you're shooting it, mostly dunks and layups.
Yeah.
When you combine it with shooting 62% from the free throw line. Like, I feel like that needs to be a tick higher, and I think it will if he gets in the gym and works. 4.4 rebounds. You'd like for that to be a little bit higher. 1.6 blocks is good. So overall, 6.8 points per game. Charles Bediako playing about 18 minutes a game. A lot of starts, mostly starts, but not always in the group that finishes. Let me throw that to you. Would you put Bediako in the what's went right, what's went wrong, or kind of neither category?
That's a good question.
And what were your expectations of him coming in from reading recruiting articles and hearing about practice and all that kind of stuff?
So just by keeping up with him a little bit through the recruiting cycle, I knew there would be a lot of rawness to him. He was a kid that didn't play basketball his whole life. He kind of picked up on it a little bit later, in his teenage years, and you can kind of see that. You see the potential, and even his high school, just seeing interviews with his high school coaches and stuff like that before he transferred to IMG, he kept mentioning, he's very raw, but the athleticism, the talent, the potential is all there. And when a guy's 7 foot, that ceiling for people taking chances on you and working with you is a lot higher because everyone wants a 7 foot rim protector and all that. And you saw flashes of that, like the early on in the season, the Gonzaga game. I forget how many blocks he had, but it was, I think the north side of 5, 6, 7, somewhere around in there, which is like, wow, this is what we need. We haven't had a shot blocker, since Dante Hall, and it's really nice to have a guy in there that guys really respect and think about going to the rim. But you saw that kind of taper off especially when we got an SEC play, and you saw the physicality kind of take a toll on him, and people kind of get into their spots and being able to score on him because he's backed into the goal, or just they got them where he wanted, and he kind of figured that later on. Hey, it don't matter how tall I am, if they get to where they want to go, I can't stop them. Which is a good sign of growth, and especially for a young guy like him.
And bigs, bigs have different learning curves sometimes than other positions.
You're totally right.
We're talking about Walker Kessler right now, and he played like 8 or 9 minutes a game last year at Carolina. He was the third big and couldn't really get on the floor consistently. Oscar Tshiebwe had some issues at West Virginia and he put up pretty good numbers, but had some issues there and ended up now being a star at Kentucky. LSU has a 5-star big guy that's been just okay this year. Hadn't really shown out a lot. Jalen Williams at Arkansas, a huge jump from freshman to sophomore year. He was okay as a freshman, but didn't make an impact. And so that's why I don't think Bediako made much of an impact on this season yet. There's still a chance, but I didn't think it was like a negative where he seemed like a flop or anything to me. So that's why I had him in the what's went right, even though he's not at the level of Keon Ellis or Shackford right now for this Alabama team.
Exactly. When guards come in, they have, scoring that they can rely on. A lot of guards now, especially nowadays, they can really score the ball. And that's why I think you see them translate quicker to the next level. But big guys, if it's a lot harder to score the ball when you're playing veteran big guys that are bigger, stronger than you, because a lot of down low is physicality and size and who's more matured and all that. Unless you're like a Jabari who can step out and shoot 45% from 3 at a high volume.
Yeah, so Jabari and Holmgren have made that seem a little easier than it really is to play like they play.
Exactly. And he don't have the body that like a Kofi Coburn from Illinois has, or someone like that that's just a big brute and can kind of get to where he wants and finish. So, but I like the Kessler, not necessarily comparison as far as how they play, but I like the comparison and the growth. I think you'll see, I think Bediako and I think everyone kind of knew that he'd be a 2, 3, possibly 4-year guy. And I really think his growth from, freshman year to however long he stays, junior, senior year, it's going to be a big time growth, and he'll be a big impact player for us in years to come. Just because, he's starting to realize this game, and he's going to he'll understand it faster, which will lead to him being a better rim protector and all that. And that's really what Oates wants from him is, a rim runner, get putbacks, get rebounds, but really protect the rim on the defensive end and allow our guards to play up tighter on defense, on ball pressure and stuff like that.
So moving on to the what went wrong, and we can go back at the end, and if you had something else for what went right or a specific player, you can jump in. But what went wrong, and it hasn't been a disaster by any means, but when you see the expectations that Quinterly had, JQ, in a way, you have to say that's what went wrong, in my opinion. He was +6 in minutes played this year. He's way up, like mid-30s right now.
Yeah.
He's shooting 2.5 more times a game than he did last year, and his field goal percentage is 6 points down than what it is last year. His 3-point field goal percentage is 15 points down what it was last year. It was like 40-something to like 29 or 30 right now. His free throw percentage is up, 7% up. He's a tick up in rebounds, like a little bit less than 1 a game. He's only really 1 assist up for playing 6 more minutes. Is a little tough for me. But he's only 1 turnover up too. He's not turning the basketball over a lot either. Overall points per game went from like 12.9 to 14.3. The floor is yours, Drew. Tell me what went wrong with JQ this year. Were the expectations unrealistic? Is it just a thing of him just not shooting the 3 ball very well, and that's just affected his whole game? Or talk to me about JQ a little bit.
So JQ, I don't know if you remember this, but going into last season, he was the
Jelly
guy.
fam, yeah, I remember.
He was the guy because he's this is 3rd year here. He set out the 1st year because of the transfer rules, and Kyra was the starting point guard that year. Well, going into last year, we thought that the baton was being passed down to him. It was his turn to lead the team. He was going to be our guy, but he found a role in that 6-man slot that really allowed him to flourish. He could come into games, and get his shots, and he was shooting a high percentage, and he didn't have to play 35 minutes a game to get those, or we didn't have to rely on him for 35 minutes a game to help us win. I think that's the biggest difference in his play from last year to this year. You don't shoot 43% one year, and then the next year you shoot, I don't know, was it like 27, 28 now?
Yeah, I think it's up to 29 now. It's
29.
close.
Yeah, he shot better these last few games. Yeah, I don't think you see that big of a jump without a really good reason. And I really just like, for instance, I've seen it in multiple games, but the game at Auburn, when he went on that run, when Bama went on that run, it was 90% him just getting to where he wants and finishing. But when he ran out of gas, that's when Auburn started that run that ended up running away with it. And that's because we're having to play him 35 minutes a game. Whereas last year when we could play him 20, 30, 25 minutes a game, that or whatever he played last year, that allowed him to get those breaths and come in and just be energized and ready to go and to get his. And I think that's the biggest difference in his percentage-wise. Now, I mean, as far as taking care of the ball and you even see that in games when he gets tired, he gets careless and he makes some dumb passes he don't make when he's, really feeling it and really, into the game. So I do see, and that's, coming off of last year, I really had a high expectation. When I heard first team all SEC, I expected him to be on that list. You saw the potential last year and what he could bring into this year. But I think just the amount of usage that Bama required off of him this year really took a toll into his numbers and his productivity. And I mean, we're a better team when he's on the court and controlling things because he slices and dices and makes passes that no one on this team does. And not a lot of guards in the country really have the knack for. So
Looks like Drew's buffering on us there for a minute. Just hang on with us right here, and we'll try to get Drew back on. Just hang on with us just for a minute. We'll get him back on. But while we're waiting on Drew, let me jump into kind of the next discussion after Quinterly. And I had JD Davison, and definitely want to get Drew back on to talk about JD Davison. But it's about expectations. If he didn't have the expectations that he did, in my opinion, the Athlon had him the number 5 impact freshman in the country. He was a 5-star recruit, number one point guard in the country on some sites. And he didn't live up to that to me. I thought, well, he's back-to-back player in the state, number 1 player in the state of Alabama. I just didn't really think he's gotten there. And I was looking at his stat line for the year. He's playing 25 minutes a game. And we go back to talking about Quinterly. I feel like if JD Davison was doing a few more things, then they could trust to not play Quinterly as much. I think that's what Nate Oates wants to do, but he hasn't really gotten there. And he might hit that second wind here, going into the end of the year. I think it's definitely possible. But 25 minutes a game, shot 47% from the field, 29.6 to 30% there from the 3-point line, 72% free throw shooter, 4.7. Okay, so what he does well with the other stuff. If you get out of the scoring column, he can make an impact on the game. And that's what I really like about him. 4.7 rebounds a game, 4.1 assists a game, almost 1 steal, 0.9 steals, 0.4 blocks. He gets a couple of those. 2.8 turnovers, a little bit high, but he's got the ball a good bit when he's in there. 8.6 points per game. So that's JD Davison. And I had him on what's went wrong because of expectations. If he hadn't had that level of expectation, then I wouldn't have put him on there. I'd have said, okay, decent freshman year. He'll get better and be ready next year to make a real impact. But when you got that kind of expectations, then that's going to happen. So I'm going to put him on there. And then the trio of players I want to talk about, and hopefully we get Drew back on. There he's coming on. All right, let's see if he can hear me now. We kept rolling, Drew. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, so I'll briefly do this because I just talked about JD Davison a little bit, but I want to get your opinion on it, so I'll set you up for a second. I said I had JD Davison next on my list, and it's all due to expectations. It's not due to what his numbers look like this year. It's not due to eye test watching him play. If he would not have been, like on some sites, the number 1 point guard in the country, if he would not have been, Athlon had him as the number 5 impact freshman in the country above Jabari Smith. If he wasn't back-to-back, I think Mr. Alabama basketball in the state, if all that stuff wasn't on him, I would have said his numbers, watching him play, okay, decent freshman year. He's going to make a big impact next year as a sophomore. That's how my thoughts would be. But when he has those level of expectations, I think that puts, I think that makes it where you could put him in the what went wrong category of this list. And I won't go over all the numbers again because I just did it. But he's playing 25 minutes a game. So I feel like that may also impact the JQ stuff. Like if you were getting a little bit more on JD Davison, then you didn't have to rely on JQ to do as much. I think they go hand in hand. That's why I wanted to hit next. But just briefly, he shot the ball okay, 47% from the field, 29.6 to 30% from 3. But what I also said just now, but real quickly, he impacts the game on other things is what I like. 4.7 rebounds a game, 4.1 assists a game, almost a steal a game, about half a block a game. Little high in turnovers, 2.8, but he has the basketball a lot. And then 8.6 points per game overall. So let me just throw it to you, thinking about expectations, thinking about what you personally thought, heard, read. What's been your take on JD Davison this season?
I'm kind of in the same boat. A guy as highly heralded as he was coming out of high school, but at the same time, guys that play like he does is very hit or miss. Guys that rely so much on your athleticism and getting downhill. This isn't a Sharif Cooper who can just he plays through facilitating. a guy like that, or a guy like Trey Young who plays through his ability to shoot the ball from unlimited range.
So what about Colin Sexton, though? Because I feel like there's a lot of similarities in what we were led to believe about J.D. Davison and what Colin Sexton was. Colin Sexton made a huge impact on the game from day one as soon as the ball got in his hands. Why has that been different for J.D. Davison?
I think is I think it's more on mentality. When Colin Sexton walked on that court, he believed he was the best player in that gym. It don't matter what gym he walked in. He thought he was the best guy out there, and he was going to get his, or he was going to make you work and make you beat him. The mentality, like for instance, the video that went viral through in high school of him telling Penny Hardaway that his son is trash. Can you like the audacity to walk up to an NBA guy, legend like Penny Hardaway, and telling him face to face that your son is trash? That's not a normal mindset that players just have. And I think that dog in him is what made Colin so fun to watch and so aggressive, get into the hole. And Colin, but it's kind of overshadowed by his ability to finish and get to the rim and all that. But his pull-up jumpers and his three-point shot was actually pretty consistently. He was really good at all three levels of scoring the ball, which made him so tough. And like the 3-on-5 game, against Minnesota at Barclays Center, the guy is 3-on-5 and they can't stop him. You got two extra guys. I think that's the biggest difference between him and JD. I'm not saying JD doesn't have a tough mentality or anything like that. It's just, there's a lot of times in this season where I would love to see him just be aggressive, for all 30 minutes he plays or 25 minutes he plays, be aggressive, have that dog mentality to where you walk out there and you're better than that guy in front of you. And I think if JD had that more of Colin's mindset, you would see a lot more similarities into the production, into his draft stock and that kind of area. But I that's my biggest, difference between those two guards when you compare them, because you're right, they rely a lot on athleticism, getting to the rim and finishing. And JD's actually a bigger guard, a little more stout. But yeah, and that's been my biggest issue with JD is it's not the turnovers, But I saw a tweet today where he averages 2.8 turnovers a game. Where if you go back and look at Alabama guards, Colin Sexton averaged 2.8, Kyra Lewis averaged 2.8, Herb averaged 2.8. I think JQ averaged 2.8. So it's a common trend no matter all the way down. But with those other guys made up for, defensively or offensively, whereas JD goes through lulls when he just kind of disappears and stuff like that. But I
think defensively is where I would want to see more. I expect to see some of that stuff on offense and defense too. I'm just thinking back on young point guards, and I start with Auburn, and even this year, Zep Jasper is an older player now, but he is just a dog on defense. And Wendell Green thinks he's the best player on the floor every time he gets out there, and that's been something that apparently has helped him, and coaches, didn't believe in him, and he's had to prove it at every level. And maybe JD hasn't had to do that. I'm going back to Jared Harper had an average freshman year, but he made pretty big impacts because he thought he was the best shooter. He thought he was the best player actually on the floor too. You got to have a little bit of that in you.
Exactly.
I think the closest I can get to, and it's not the same player, Davion Mitchell, his year at Auburn, was like that. He was a little timid on offense. He got to the rim a lot, didn't shoot the ball. Well, he shot it a little bit, but didn't shoot it great. And then defensively, though, he had such just extreme effort all in you all the time. I guess there's just not that one thing that JD has done really well consistently that he could hang his hat on. So everybody be like, yeah, but he's great at this. You know what I mean? We may be having some more technical issues. Sure, we having some more technical issues. All right, y'all bear with us for a minute. All right, you got me back now?
Yeah, we're live.
All right, let's move to this next thing then, because I want to get off the Alabama players after this. so we won't have to go super in depth. But I put this trio of players on the what's went wrong, but I put a question mark by all three of them because I wanted to kind of give you the option to either say, yeah, it's gone wrong, or you're undecided, and we know that things can change in the next 2-3 weeks. I understand that. But my thing was Jawan Gary, Darius Miles, and Noah Gurley. So just kind of quickly on their rundown, Gary's playing 6 minutes per game more than he was last year. Miles is playing 13 minutes. He barely played last year. I didn't realize how much of a jump that's been. And then Gurley is down 11 minutes from what he played at Furman. Just some other stats that jumped out to me. Gary's only gone up from 3.8 points a game to 6.5. He's basically shooting twice more per game. He shot 3 times a game last year. He's shooting 5 times a game now. His percentages just a tick down, 2%. Free throw percentage has gone up 53 to 63%, but he doesn't get there very much. His rebounds have gone up 2.8 to 3.4. I don't feel like I'm still getting what I need out of that. Miles percentages have stayed pretty much the same. He's had a jump in rebounding. He didn't rebound the ball barely at all. His freshman year, he's 0.9 rebounds a game. He's at 3.4 now. He's an assist up. He's a steal up. He's a block up. And overall, he's 2.2 points per game to 5.9. So I feel like we've gotten a bigger jump out of Miles than Gary, although Gary had more of a role last year. Mm-hmm. And then Noah Gurley. Before I get to Noah Gurley, give me briefly, since we keep messing up, but Jawan Gary, Darius Miles, did either of them make the jump you wanted them to make? What's kind of been the situation there that it has hindered them from giving you what you needed out of them?
Miles, you kind of saw last year, as a freshman, had a lot to catch up with, and you're still seeing it defensively is where his biggest jump needs to be. But going from last year to this year, I expected him to have a bigger role on this team, and he has, because we can use his size and athleticism, and his scoring ability is good at times when he's not being done with the ball. But his biggest jump has been on the defensive side of the ball. Oates has really kind of asked a lot from him defensively. At Auburn, at Tuscaloosa, he was guarding Jabari. He was guarding, so he kind of fits that, his long guard. He can kind of extend. Gary, he started out really strong. In the Baylor game, he played exceptional against Baylor. But it seems at times he's the wrong man at the wrong place at the wrong time. He excels in when a guard drives, he's cutting backdoor, whatever, catches it and flushes it. But it seems like a lot of times this year we drove and kicked to him for a 3, and that's not his game. His makes this year is definitely up from what they were last year, but that's not what I, as a fan, want to see. I want to see him cutting and catching that thing and flushing, or going to get offensive rebounding, putting it back up or something like that. Those energy plays that we rely so much on from him. And he's been in a lull these last few games, and we haven't really seen that, Gary. But I'm hoping, something clicks and he gets that back going, because that's when we're at our best, when he extends possessions for us and gets putbacks and those tough, hard plays that we need out of him. And as far as Gurley.
Yeah, let's jump to Gurley for a minute. I've got a couple stats I want to throw to you on that. First of all, he was second team All SoCon last year. He was the freshman All SoCon the year before. He was first team All SoCon tournament last year. He played really well at the end of the year. Just some stats comparing his last year at Furman to this year at Alabama. He's playing 11 less minutes per game. His field goal percentage and stuff is pretty close. It's almost identical. He is better from 2 at Alabama than he was at Furman, but he's down in threes. I'm trying to look at the percentage. He made 1.5 threes a game last year at Furman. He's only making 0.6 threes a game right now at Alabama. His 3-point field goal percentage went from 34% to 26%, and his free throw percentage went from 69% to 63%. He's down in rebounds. He was rebounding 5 times a game at Furman. He's 3.5 now. He was getting 2.5 assists a game at Furman, and he's getting 0.5 assists now. 1 steal to half a steal, 1.1 blocks to 0.8 blocks, and points per game 15.4 to 7.0. I don't want to put that all on minutes played, because I feel like he was getting a lot of the first opportunities this season, and Nate Oates wanted him to play maybe not that many minutes, but close to it. He wanted that production out of him.
Yeah.
Been a little bit of a roller coaster, just like Alabama. Gurley's had some good games, and when he plays well, Alabama usually plays well. to me, that is something that they've really missed. That guy coming in, if he'd have been an impact transfer guy like a Walker Kessler in his own way, I think this Alabama record looks a little bit different. Talk to me about your season with Noah Gurley.
Yeah, I mean, what I mentioned a little bit earlier is Nate Oates, his system thrives with the big guy that can stretch the floor. And you mentioned Gurley's stats, and we played Gurley the last year or two, when he was playing for Furman, and he did exactly that. A 6'8" guy that could stretch the floor and shoot threes and do it at a good percentage. So that was the expectations coming into this season. He kind of his percentage-wise dug a big hole early on in the season. I don't know if it was style of play or his role or what it was, but he just wasn't comfortable in our offense. It wasn't shooting the ball well, and that percentage is he shot the ball better as the years gone on, and his post up game, his 10-foot and in game is a lot better than I expected. I knew he could stretch the floor, but I didn't really know how good of a back to the basket finisher he was. And really, we haven't used that as much as we probably should have this season and got more production from him. But yeah,
that's somewhere some assists come from too, because looking at somebody who got over 2.5 assists a game last year, and now he's not even getting a half of one. Maybe that's something too. Let me ask you this: Alabama, we've talked about all year, their toughness on defense or lack thereof is what Nate Oates is hammered on. And the guys taking charges, the guys playing defense through multiple rebounds, all that kind of stuff. I feel like some of that's been put on Gurley, and I feel like he's done some of that. He's gotten in foul trouble. It's taken him out of rhythm in a lot of games.
Yeah.
Do you think, this is just something that popped in my head, and it could be totally crazy. Do you think it's hard to be that physical guy on defense and your team asks you to be this guy taking charges and being in the paint, mucking it up and doing all that, and then to turn around on offense and shoot the ball well and have some perimeter game, and because he wasn't a true back to the basket big, even that's where he's excelled at Alabama. Do you think have you ever thought about it being hard to play defense one way and then try to be a different type of guy on offense?
I do. Yeah, I agree. How in the amount of toll being that guy on defense, how it affects your offense,
especially if you're not used to it, if that's not second nature to you, if that's not what you do, and now you're trying to do all that.
Yeah. I mean, take for instance, Anthony Davis in the NBA. He is even said himself that he doesn't enjoy playing that 5, even though I line up with him at the 5 is where teams can excel, because how you guard that man with your big guy. But he doesn't like taking the beating that you get at that 5 because it affects the way he plays and affects his longevity and all those other issues. So I certainly do think that's a big role. And Nate Oates is, Noah Gurley announced that he's coming back next year, and Nate Oates came out and said that his biggest growth he wants to see from this year and next year is rebounding. He wants to see Gurley be able to rebound the ball well, so that he can get back up to that 25-minute mark, and help us. But does he understand what kind of condition you have to be in to produce that defensively and be able to produce offensively the way that, he's shown at Furman and spurts throughout this season? So I agree with you. I think it does take a big toll to be able to produce that hard-nosed, blue-collar style defense and still be productive on the other end.
Two other guys I want to throw to you, and you mentioned in Burnett a minute ago about how, he was that wing. It should have been a good defender, had some potential at the 3-point line that Alabama could really use. So you mentioned that earlier. If you have anything else, jump in there. But also want to throw the Alex Chico. I know he's a guy that was hurt. And then I think a lot of people are expecting him to maybe get in the mix a little bit this year. What happened there? Is he still injured? Just not been able to get in the mix? Tell me something about Chico.
That's a big question for a lot of Bama fans as well. A guy that's 6'11",
high caliber recruit, right? He had a lot of offers from other folks and stuff.
I'm not real sure.
Okay. He wasn't Canadian, was he?
No. He's French. Alex is like Alec Chiku or something like that.
There you go.
But he's kind of a late addition to the Bama signing class, and I really didn't get to see a whole lot of his game because You know, he tore his Achilles last year, missed the whole season, and he's been trying to get back healthy. But the little bit I saw of him early on in the season, and it's expected, you know, he's essentially a freshman coming into this season, and just getting into the health conditions to be able to actually play. I feel like the he's kind of that Bediako situation where he just seems so much, you know, his physicality is just so far from where it needs to be to play at this level that you kind of maybe that's contributed to him not playing. I really don't know. I haven't heard Oates talk much about him or see much about his status, but I feel like the physicality and the speed of the game has been a big hurdle that he hasn't been able to overcome, and maybe that's what's led. Because you would think with Alabama's depth at that position, a 6'11" guy that can possibly stretch the floor would be, you know, someone you would give more of a chance to. But obviously, there's something there that we haven't seen because, you know, you don't just sit a guy on scholarship that's that big and whatever for no reason.
Yeah, I mean, with giving Rojas opportunities as he's come back, giving the walk-on some opportunities, you feel
Yeah.
like if there was something there, you know, health-wise or whatever, that he would be there. Before I jump into a little team stuff and then we move on to SEC tournament, is there any other player or situation or anything about the team that you would put in the it's gone right or it's gone wrong?
So we've kind of ran down the list of guys that have played the bulk minutes, you know, and Rojas kind of fits in that in between. You know, I do think he's gone right this year. I don't know what his stats are. I'm sure they're a little different just because of, you know, he missed a good portion of the first of the season. But I feel like as far as maturity wise, Rojas has grown in his role. Last year it was like a bull in a china shop, which last year's team didn't need his style as much as this year's team does. But I do think he has grown as a leader and grown his game to where, you know, at times you enjoy we enjoy Rojas being there because, you know, he can move well for a 6'8", 6'9" guy against bigger guys. He's tough. He makes those hustle plays. He'll knock down a three every now and then. But other than that, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with most of the guys that get the bulk of the minutes for this Bama squad.
I think the only other thing I would say on what's went right, and I know we kind of joke about it because you and Riley always make this the calling card, but the strength of schedule. You know, if Alabama doesn't schedule Baylor and Gonzaga and whoever, and they don't get those wins, this team's 19-12. Look at the records of A&M and Florida and South Carolina. They're very similar to Alabama, yet Alabama is looked at as a 5 or a 6 seed right now. Those guys are barely even on the bubble, if at all.
Yeah.
So credit to I don't know if they used the old coach Houston to help out with the schedule.
Yeah, they did. ACI.
So give him a credit right there. Give him a shout out. And other schools need to look. And you know, it only works if you win. I don't think, but the thing is, it's upside to me because it wouldn't have crushed Alabama if they'd have lost those games. It pretty much only helped.
Yeah, little risk, high reward. You know, and that's kind of games.
That's right.
You know, at worst case scenario, they help you realize what you got to be.
Exposes your weaknesses and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why Oates does it. He wants to see those weaknesses early on and try to fix them.
If anything went bad, it was just maybe it put some expectation on this team.
I was about to say, I think it added more negativity to this run for the season than it did anything. Because
I think so too. But hey, like we said, you're not in the tournament solidly if you don't have both of those wins. I truly believe that. But I want to look at a couple team stats. We won't go too heavy into this because they're so similar to last year, and then we'll jump into the SEC tournament preview. So I went down and looked at some team stats because I really wanted to look at the team last year. Went 26-7, 16-2 in the league. So, you know, just the best year of Alabama basketball in a little while. And then compare it to the team that's 19-12 with a 9-9 record. Guys, these are really similar. Like I'll quickly go down some of these, but they're almost identical. Last year to this year, 79.7 points per game. This year, 80.1. I mean, that's almost incredible. It's less than a half a point difference. Field goal percentage, very, very less than 1% difference, shooting in the low to mid 40s. 3-point field goals, if you could say a 4% higher clip last year than this year. Last year, Alabama shot 35.2% from three. This year, 31.1. I believe it's something like 10 makes a game last year to 9 makes. So, yeah, it impacts close games, but you're in the ballpark, certainly. Rebounds, Alabama had 1 rebound per game better last year than this year, but this year they've actually got a little higher differential. They're 3 rebounds over their opponents. Last year was 2. Assist to turnover, this is incredible. 14 assists to basically 14 turnovers last year. 14 assists to 14 and a half turnovers. I mean, they're identical this year. Steals were up a little bit. Is that a surprise at all with that roster with Herb and those guys? 8.5 steals to 7.5 this year, or 7.1 this year, about 1.5 more.
I would have actually thought it'd been higher last year, given given the 2 teams.
I would have thought so too. Blocks, this year's half a block better, 4.9 to 4.3. I guess if you're going to get into any differences, it would be the opponents. We're talking about defense a little bit. And last year, opponents against Alabama shot 40.8%. So Alabama's team shot 43.5. They gave up 40.8. This year's team shoots 44.4, and they give up 43.6. So a couple more makes per game, which kind of makes sense, I think. Opponents' 3-point percentage. Last year's Alabama team held opponents to 29.1%. So we talk about how JQ has shot the ball poorly. He's been at 25 to 30 most of the year. That's what they made every team shoot last year if you're Alabama. This year's at 33.1. It's not bad, but it's not really, really good. Not going to win you games.
Yeah.
And then opponents' turnovers per game. Last year, Alabama turned people over at 15.3 to this year 13.1. So just seeing that snapshot and seeing how similar those numbers are, but where there are a couple differences, is there anything at all that jumps out to you other than, it's little things that cause the difference in wins and losses in high-level college basketball?
That's really remarkable. If you watch the 2 teams, you would not think anywhere close, especially defensively, that those numbers will be that close.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, if just watching these teams play is daylight and dark. Yes, I knew the offensive side was up from last year because last year's team was more defensive oriented. But man, that is pretty unreal. But just goes to show you, like you said, I watched. I don't know if you got to watch last night. ESPN
I was watching Chattanooga and Furman.
No, I'm talking about the ESPN dropped an SEC story on Alabama basketball last night, recapping over this season. It was really good. And it showed Oates in the locker room talking to his guys or in the meeting room and saying, if they don't, the few possessions, talking about value in possessions for 40 minutes a game, the few possessions, against a Georgia, Missouri, Texas A&M, and one other team he named, if we play a full 40 and we value each possession and, and treasure it and win those games, we're looking at more of a 2 seed in this NCAA tournament as opposed to a 5 or 6 seed. It's just crazy how a few possessions a game can change your season. And like you said, if you don't have those big wins in the beginning of the season that Bama did, those games, the Missouris and the Georgias and all that you're sitting on the bubble like a Florida, like sure, as you said, A&M is. But yeah, I mean that's and it's kind of crazy because last year it kind of shows you how the landscape of college basketball has changed as well, because last year that Bama squad was top 10 in the nation in defensive efficiency, whereas this year we're like 50 something.
Yeah.
But this year's best offensive efficiency, we're top 15. I know it's one of the best efficiencies we've had offensively in years. But last year, we couldn't never crack the top 15. It was always 20 something. And that's what kind of, kept us from being maybe a Final Four team or whatever.
Yeah.
But it goes to show you how the landscape changes year to year. And because, I haven't dived into it like you just did, but that's pretty remarkable how close those 2 teams were.
I thought so too. I thought they would have differences. I really did. And I just thought this was interesting. I forget about the COVID sometimes in the gyms because it's been so normal this year in the SEC. And average attendance at Alabama home games last year was 2,053 people, and now it's 10,953. So a little different atmosphere. And I do want to give the students especially a huge shout out. Even on midweek games when there's been some average regular attendance, that student session has been slammed and energized, and I think they've helped Alabama a lot this year.
For sure.
So that was kind of our little season wrap up. What's went wrong? What's went right for Alabama? And now, before we go, I did want to jump into SEC tournament a little bit because it's coming up very soon. It's coming up tomorrow night if you want to count the play-in game. So we'll do a couple things there. First of all, I guess just picks for the play-in games at all tomorrow night. I was trying to get the times right on here. Let's see. I think it's at 5 and 7, I believe. Missouri versus Ole Miss and Vanderbilt and Georgia. Any thoughts on those two games?
That first one with Missouri and Ole Miss, that's kind of a tricky situation. You watch the games where both Auburn and Alabama, went to Missouri, and you saw that team, and you're like, man, this team could be a middle of the pack SEC team, if not better. But then you watch them play Georgia the other night, and you're like, goodness, man, it's just Alabama has the Jekyll and Hyde or whatever, but the Missouri Jekyll and Hyde is even crazier to watch. Now Ole Miss is down. Their guard play has been, you can't have a solid rotation all year due to injuries and all that. But
these two teams have played twice this year. Now, granted, one of them was a long time ago, but January 18th, Missouri went to Ole Miss and won by 25.
Yeah.
In February 12th, Ole Miss went to Missouri and Missouri won 74-68 by 6. So is it that whole it's hard to beat a team three times, or does that just tell you that Missouri is a better basketball team and might have this team's number?
Yeah, and I think that first one is kind of misleading just because of the injuries and them finding out who they are. I think it'll be a lot better game than that on tomorrow, but I do think Missouri ends up pulling it out.
According to ESPN's BPI or whatever, they have a 73% chance Ole Miss wins the game.
Wow.
I'm going with Missouri.
I think they will too, but if Jarkel Joyner gets going and gets hot like he did against us, they can be fun to watch. I know y'all didn't get to see the best version of him at Auburn because he was sick or something, but
he was out the first time we played him at Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And then he came in. He had some stuff. I could see a little bit. I could see where he had some game.
Yeah, when we went to Ole Miss this year, he was shooting lights out. And it was just he was a tough guard that matchup. But I think it'll be a good game. But I do think Missouri will win.
Matthew Morrell always plays well against Auburn.
Yeah,
he's a guy we recruited, we really liked, and he picked Ole Miss.
Sneaky athleticism.
Yeah,
he's
good.
I didn't realize he was that athletic.
Let's move to the 7:00 game, Georgia at Vanderbilt. I think this would be a pretty big. I think the lines are already out. First of all, Ole Miss favored by 3.5 in that first one. I'm taking Missouri in the points for sure.
Yeah.
Georgia Vandy's favored by 9. I'm not sure they don't blow Georgia out. I mean, I feel like Vandy has kind of picked up a little bit, unless they're playing for Tom Crean or there's reports that he's already out at the end of the year. Any thoughts on Georgia winning this game? Or I mean, it'd be pretty disappointing for Vandy not to win this one.
Yeah, I'm going Vandy too. That you saw in the later half of the season them really find a rhythm. And Scottie Pippen Jr., man, he's just such a tough guard. He gets to the hole well. He shoots ball very well. He's very active in his passing and getting guys open looks. So I still like Vanderbilt in this matchup. But, you can never count March out, man. It's a crazy time of the year, and teams do things you never think they would.
So on that note, if any of the 4 teams, the obvious answer seems to be Vanderbilt, but if any of the 4 teams, could you see them making like a run like Auburn did a couple years ago, making it to a semifinal, I think it was 2015, any of the top 4, any of those bottom 4, you could see making a couple game wins?
So,
Ole Miss, Missouri, Georgia, and Vandy. Anybody you thinking that thing could win 2 games or 3 games and make a semifinal?
I think that it'd be hard to make a semifinal with
the top 4 being as strong as they are this year. To have played 2 games and have to knock one of them off is asking a lot. So let me ask this then. So I think we'll say no. But the winner of Ole Miss, Missouri plays LSU. The winner of Georgia Vandy plays Alabama.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to make
Vandy, Alabama the biggest opportunity right there? I mean, I hate to say it for our Alabama guys listening, but I mean, that was a pretty close game, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was in spurts. the ending of that game was a little, there's a lot of fouls called that probably weren't fouls at other gyms. Scottie Pippen, I think, shot 35 free throws in the last 4 minutes. It seemed like
I believe it.
He didn't really, but it felt like that. I don't really see either moving on, to be honest with you. The way LSU's finding their rhythm back with Pinson back, and honestly, I don't see us losing to a Georgia team again, and I really don't see us
forgot
losing to
about
Vandy
that.
again.
I
But
forgot about the Georgia game. That's wild. Looking at Georgia's season and thinking that they pulled that off and almost pulled off the win against Auburn too.
I know that.
That's insane. So all right, we're telling you don't bet on any of the bottom four. We
Yeah,
don't think they
I
can
don't
make
think
the
this
run.
is the year to do that.
I think it says more about the rest of the SEC field than it does about those teams. I think those are pretty normal bottom four teams, to be completely honest.
I think the top six is just so strong this year that it's really, especially making to the semis. If they made it to the quarterfinals, maybe you could put some stock in there, but the semis, that'd be tough.
Let's move to the bubble teams. This is going to be a pretty boring year for bubble teams in the SEC because I feel like those top six are in solidly. Like we said, we're looking at bracket matrix, and they have Auburn as the last 1 seed. Let me see. I know they've got Kentucky as the second highest 2 seed. They've got Tennessee as the second highest 3 seed. Keep an eye on Tennessee sneaking up there. Yeah. Arkansas as the worst 4 seed. And then they've got LSU and back-to-back. And LSU and Alabama back-to-back as the 2 highest 6 seeds. After that, they do not have anybody in the SEC in the field. The only other team even on the bubble they have is Florida. But to make it more interesting, Florida A&M play each other. I think the winner of that feels like they have an opportunity to get a win against Auburn to get in the field. I don't think the winner of that game is necessarily in the field unless something crazy happens. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the last Lenardi bracket I saw was, A&M and Florida on the next 4 out. So obviously, I don't think them beating each other will get them in. Whoever wins that has to beat Auburn to have a chance. I do think a win over Auburn will jump you up there. You just said a potential 1 seed in the tournament. That's a really big win.
Neutral floor. That's kind of scary for Auburn. I feel like too. If not knowing how much motivation you really have, and then some team could possibly get in the tournament by beating you.
I was about to say one of the scariest opponents you can play is one that has something to play for. And Auburn don't really have anything to play for unless other than bragging rights.
Yeah, not much.
And really no other matchup in this tournament has anything to play for except for those 2 teams right there. So it's a tough draw, and Mike White and Buzz, they're preaching that, and we'll see if it translates to anything. But Auburn's a tough matchup for both those teams. I feel like, even though Florida kind of plays such a different style really they both play such a different style, but Florida plays, they can match up better with size and athleticism and all that. But it'll be an interesting, start to the tournament for sure.
Yeah, truly, I didn't like the matchup for Auburn in either one of them. Those 2 teams are just solid. They're not going to beat themselves, and that's always kind of a scary thing in a tournament in a big gym that you hadn't shot in. It could be low scoring, and those teams are good with that. On the flip side, the 7-10 game, if you want to say a couple other teams that, could make a run and put themselves in contention, I think Auburn would have much rather played the winner of State, South Carolina, 2 teams that they just beat, one on the road. The winner of that team is going to play Tennessee, though, so that is an opportunity if they could pull off a win against Tennessee, and then they still might need a win against a Kentucky or Alabama, the next one, to get in, but there's a path there. Any thoughts on which of those 2, if you had to make a prediction, Mississippi State or South Carolina could win a couple and make a run?
Yeah, really South Carolina's record doesn't look that bad, but when you go look at the strength of schedule and all of that, that's a really big downside to schedule and week. You always hear the argument of, do we schedule strong? Do we schedule weak? Do we get wins, or do we prepare ourselves for later? And South Carolina is one of those where, if they have an Auburn run, a few years ago, Auburn didn't necessarily have the strongest strength of schedule, but they made a really good run in SEC play, so it didn't matter. Whereas South Carolina this year, they had a really good non-con schedule record, but when it came to SEC play, those 10, 11, 12 losses, they really damper your chances of getting in the tournament.
Same for A&M. I think, they went off that run early in the year, but they didn't play anybody. So when they went on the SEC run, it's tough.
Exactly.
So what do you think, State or South Carolina? If you had to pick one of them, I know we're saying probably neither, but if you had to pick one of them to beat Tennessee in the second round, who is it?
I want to say Mississippi State's got the best potential. I really love their talent, and I love Iverson Molinar. South Carolina just doesn't have anybody on that team I really love, and I don't really think that their toughness is Frank Martin's usual team. When we played them, they just don't have that guy. Whereas, Mississippi State has those guys. They just haven't put it together unless they're playing at home. I don't think they won a single road game in SEC play this year. But when they were playing at home, they were really tough, and you saw kind of the dynamic of their guards and their bigs and stuff like that. So if they can find that, in Tampa in the SEC tournament, I think they could possibly win 2 games. Even though Tennessee's playing really well right now.
I'm using the same logic you used to say I would pick South Carolina just because I don't think Mississippi State has done anything, and I do think they have the guys and stuff. I had to pick a pickup team. Yeah, I'd rather have Mississippi State, but I look at it and I trust Frank Martin and getting those guys to win a couple more than I do Howland. And it seemed like they kind of wanted to lay down and quit a couple times State this year.
Yeah,
I love Iverson Molinar. I like Garrison Brooks. I like their guys, but Tolu Smith had a big game against Auburn. He's kind of come on at the end of the year, but I don't like the roller coaster. I'd rather have the steady South Carolina and Frank Martin, but I don't think either of them will. But if I had to pick one, I'd go Carolina. Before we go, I guess we'll get to our championship predictions after this. But of the top 4, because that's been the thing this year where that top 4 is kind of separated from the middle of the pack, Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas. Thinking about the bracket, what they've got on the side, if you had to pick one of them to lose early, like a Friday afternoon, and not even make a semifinal, which of those 4 would you say is the least surprising if they were to lose on Friday?
I think it would be Arkansas. I think having LSU with the potential to win that matchup and then play them in the next round would be the biggest or first loss I could see happening. I know they're the 4th seed, so you can kind of expect, the 4th seed, that matchup, you expect that one to be your first loss. But I just think matchup-wise, that is those 2 teams, man, when LSU's playing really well like they have been, now that they're fully team. And you saw, I'm pretty sure the game went to, down to the last second, last time they played, or it was overtime or something like that. And Arkansas is not playing at home where they thrive on, getting those charge calls that are pretty ridiculous and a lot of things go their way. I think you see a much more evenly matched. And, I don't think Florida or A&M, I don't think Florida could beat Auburn again, to be honest with you. I don't really see A&M matching up well, even though their offense has taken another turn and it's playing really good. They got a couple of players shooting the ball really well. But I hope it's Kentucky. I hope if they're not the first, I hope they're their second team to lose on that Friday. But I think Arkansas could be that first one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was looking earlier in the year in January, Arkansas went to Baton Rouge and won by 7. And then they played just last week, and Arkansas won by 1. I'm not quite an Arkansas believer. I think Auburn, Tennessee, and Kentucky are a step above Arkansas. I do think it's hard to play in their building. And Joe Note goes off, then they can beat anybody. But I think they need him to score like 25 points, or I don't really see Arkansas beating somebody.
Yep.
So I'm with you there. And if I had to go the other one, I mean, if Alabama gets hot and plays Kentucky, we've seen them right there. I worry about how that second half went. The last time Alabama just looked like the Globetrotters out there in the first half, and then it seemed like everything went Kentucky's way in the second half. The ball was just bouncing in their hands, and they were stroking it. But surely they don't let the same guys go off like they did last time.
If Kellen Grady has another game like that, then nobody's beating that team, because that was the most ridiculous show I've seen since Steph Curry in the All-Star game.
But and you also have to consider Kentucky will have 1 million fans there. They'll have an advantage compared to most of the teams. Nobody else. The only team with a local thing at all would be Florida, and it's not that close. I don't think they'll have a massive thing. If it's in Nashville,
No.
then there's a lot of Tennessee fans.
Yeah.
Arkansas fans come over too. Yeah, I think Auburn will have a good contingent there, but it being in Tampa, I don't love it. And I think it means there's gonna be a lot of Kentucky fans and then a lot of randoms that just, whatever.
I was
So
about to say, I've already seen tweets about how Kentucky, it's a Tuesday and it's already flooded.
we usually call it what Catlanta when it's in Atlanta. So I don't know how you say Cat Tampa, but I guess we can say that.
Yeah.
But then I guess just final prediction. If you had to make a prediction of who you think makes the championship and who wins it, who you got?
That's tough. Especially with the way teams have been playing right now. I predict. Oh man, that's tough. I really think Auburn will come out of the top side. I think they kind of find their role. Bruce is really good at getting them play well in March. But out of that bottom bracket,
we hope it's an Iron Bowl of basketball part 3. Let's just put it out there. We all hope that's what it is.
For
but if
the
you're
podcast
a bet man,
and our fans' sake,
what
yes.
you got?
But the way Tennessee's been playing and the way Kentucky can play, it's such a tough dynamic. I don't know, man.
They split their regular season, I believe, and both of them kind of won convincingly. I think Kentucky kicked their butts, and then Tennessee won pretty big too.
Yeah, and and the Bama in me wants to say, I think we finally get over the hump and beat Kentucky in an SEC tournament, because it seemed like, especially when Riley was playing, that every year we were destined to play Kentucky, whether it was in the quarterfinal or the semifinal, whichever day it was, and never could beat them. I want to say, if Kentucky gets past Bama, I think Kentucky makes it to the final. And I think Kentucky at their best may be, the best team in this league, just because of the size and different dynamics they can hit you with. But, I don't know. It'd be good. I'd really love, and I would pay money to see, Kentucky and Auburn at their best play, to see, on a neutral court, who really is that number one team. But yeah, I think if Kentucky, I think they can go on a run and make it to the finals from that South bracket.
I'm with you. I'd like to say a lot of different answers to this, and I honestly, if I had to pick, I would pick an Auburn-Alabama championship game right here. But if I was literally putting my money on the line, I like where Auburn sits, and I like this. There's been some adversity, and they're going to be ready to go. And I think with the home court advantage and not being a total believer in Tennessee, that I would pick Kentucky. And then, sure, I'll be hoping it's Auburn. But really at that point, after getting beat by Auburn earlier in the season, I think the chip is on Kentucky's shoulder, not Auburn's, which is kind of interesting spot to be in with the home court advantage and the chip on your shoulder. I can see them just shooting the ball really well and dominating on the glass and having a big night and winning the SEC tournament again.
I was about to say, and that's kind of been the thing since y'all played. Ty went down in your game. Severe Wheeler was in and out, and Coach Cal, and is at Auburn. He would have loved to have a rematch in Lexington. So it's kind of, all the, like you said, the chips on their shoulder, and they're kind of looking for that revenge game. So I think it'd be a really good game and fun to watch.
I just think overall it would be hard not to have a great championship with this bracket. Unless something crazy happens, I think we're going to be in line for a really good game on Sunday, probably the best game of the day. And that's fun to say as the SEC.
Man, I was thinking
following
about
up
that
on last year's game that was really, really good between Alabama and LSU. So,
oh man, yeah, that was nerve-wracking. But I was thinking about that in the car this week. Was, usually everyone, making an NCAA bracket and try to get it perfect is unrealistic. Was this year it's even crazier. But I was thinking, even our SEC tournament bracket would be a really hard thing to get perfect as well. There's just so many teams.
If we had 50 people do it and you could only put one bracket in, it's going to be hard for somebody to get it completely right. Something's going to happen.
Yes. I mean, if it was a limited number, I think $1 million should be the prize for getting that right too. Because
hey, I'm all in. Well, let's wrap up there. We've gone pretty long, but I wanted to kind of give a cap on the Alabama season, but not or the regular season, not the whole thing. And I'm going to try to get TJ on here, and we're going to talk some Auburn stuff maybe tomorrow, but definitely before Auburn plays on Friday. Then hopefully we can get the whole crew back in here maybe on Sunday, Selection Sunday, and wrap up the tournament and talk about going to wherever we're going to watch these teams. So again, that's why we're doing this. And it's just fun that we're in the situation where we're not on the bubble and playing for our lives. And both our programs are going to get a chance to play in March. So that's why we're here. Thanks for joining us this week. And we probably will be back at the end of this week. So keep an eye out. Drew, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, happy to be here, man.
See everybody at the end of the tournament.